All right, welcome everybody. Looks like you're all coming in from the waiting room there. Thanks for coming this Monday afternoon to our Lady Violet's Shawl class. That's Darren on the screen there. He's going to model his sample he made. If you didn't get the pattern, I will be popping download links into the chat here, both for mobile users and for those of you who can access PDFs. If you have any questions during the course of the class, please just put them in the Zoom chat here, and I will either answer them directly or pass them on to Darren. Just a reminder that this class is being recorded, and so you'll be able to access it in about 24 hours on michaels.com/classes or on the Michaels YouTube channel. And I think that's everything we have to say, so we'll let Darren get started.
Welcome to class. Today, we are going to review the pattern so that by the end of class, you will have all of the skills needed and know all the techniques to make this shawl. It's a really, really nice shawl. If you've never made a shawl before, it's really good practice, and it's a really good shape. You actually start up here at the top, and then you work as it continues to get bigger down to the point. So actually, you could make it as big or as small as you want. Like you could stop at any point to make it like really like a kerchief type garment, or you could keep going and make it really big. So once you get to the point where it stops giving you directions, instead of binding off, you could just kind of keep repeating the eyelet pattern until it's as big as you want. So it's a great versatile project. Once you do this construction, you will you really like it. It's something that comes up a lot in patterns and in fashion. So we're going to review all of the stitches you need to know. And then I'm going to show you several bind offs, because sometimes the bind off can be very stiff. You don't want that on the edge of a shawl. You want the shawl to have a nice drape along the edge, so you don't want it stiff so that it's kind of puckering in. I have 5 bind offs that I'm going to show you that are nice and stretchy. So you can pick which one, you can kind of practice them and see which one you like best. And then we're going to review the pattern quickly. Thankfully, the pattern's quite simple. Once you start into it, you just basically are repeating the steps over and over again. So it's not an intimidating pattern. It's really easy to follow. So if we want to switch the view to the view of my hands, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Before we get into this, Darren, I think we did have a question about the needle sizes, because we had a little bit of confusion versus needle size for the yarn and needle size for the pattern.
The needle size, it's kind of an option. You really could use a 15 or a 13, depending on how you want it to be. This one is actually calling for a size 15. And a size 15 needle will give it a little bit of a looser fabric, and it will give it a softer drape. But if you want to use a 13, then that will make it a little warmer and give the fabric a little body and make it a little, I don't want to say stiff or firm, but it'll just give it that little bit of extra oomph. So you could do a gauge watch or basically just start the shawl, work on it for like 10 or 15 rows, and then evaluate and see which type of needle you like better. But it calls for a 15, so that's what the pattern calls for. But I don't like to be told what to do, and I do whatever I want. So there you go. How's that? That answer the question? Okay. So I've just cast on a little swatch here, and I can demonstrate all of the stitches that we need to learn. And the first stitch that I want to demonstrate it's called KF and B, is how it's abbreviated. And that stands for knit front and back. So you'll see the abbreviation, just KF and NB. And I'm just going to knit one stitch just to start to get me past the edge. Just knit a couple stitches, so I'm not right on the edge. Okay. So a KF and B is an increase, and what that does, it takes one stitch and it turns that stitch into 2 stitches. Sometimes when we do an increase, we create a new stitch where there was no stitch. But in this situation, we're taking 1 stitch and we're changing it into 2 stitches. And the way we start that stitch is just like a normal knit stitch. We enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring it through, and then at this point, you would normally transfer it over, but we're not ready to do that yet. What we're going to do is we're going to swing our right hand needle around and go through the back of the loop through there. So let me kind of turn my needle so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going through the back of that loop, wrap my yarn, and bring it through. And then transfer both of those stitches over. And so we've added an extra stitch. And what happens is you get this little bump right here, and that means you did it correctly. So let me demonstrate that again. You start off just like normal, and then you stop right here and swing your needle to the back. And you can kind of feel it. I don't turn it to look, but I put my finger there on that loop, on the back loop, and then I can feel that I'm in the right place. But you can certainly turn to look if you need to. Wrap your yarn, bring it through, transfer it over. I'll do it one more time and then we'll see if we have questions. So we enter the loop, wrap the yarn, bring it through, and then we stop right here. And I'm going to flip it to show you what the back looks like. So we go through the back loop. So you see where I'm going there. Wrap the yarn, bring that second loop through, and transfer it over. And then it's easy to see, if you're not sure if you did it or not, you can go back and count. You can clearly see here that I've done 3 of them, because you can look for these bumps. And you see those bumps, you know how many times you did it. Do we have any questions about knitting in the front and the back of the loop?
We'll see if we've got questions on that, but I just want to clarify that you are not starting the shawl right now, correct, Darren?
Correct. Yeah, this is just a little swatch that I started so I can demonstrate all of the stitches. If I started the shawl, it would probably take like 6 hours before it got to the point where we were doing all these things. And we don't want to waste your life watching me knit garter stitch for 5 hours. So I'm just starting on this little swatch, and then you'll be able to see how to make the stitches, and then we're going to review the pattern at the end. All right.
We've got a request to see the knit front and back one more time. And then Ashley says that she wraps the yarn towards herself. And is that wrong?
Towards yourself. Let's look at that and see. Okay, so enter the stitch. So the correct way to wrap the yarn is, there's different ways of looking at it, but you want to take it to your left under your needles, and then you're going to bring it back across to the right. So that's the correct way to wrap it. Otherwise, you'll get a twisted stitch. So that's the correct way to wrap it. I'm not sure when you say you're wrapping it towards yourself, there it's coming towards myself. But if you're wrapping it towards yourself first this way, then that is going to be wrapping it backwards. So we wrap our stitch just like normal. Bring the loop through, and then you stop right here. Take your needle to the back of your work. You're going to find that back loop. So you can kind of see here, I'm kind of stretching it out. You wouldn't want to stretch yours like this because you might distort your fabric, but so that you can see, you enter through the back loop right there, wrap the yarn, and then bring it through, transfer both over, and look for that bump to make sure you did it correctly. Okay, I'll do one more. Are you able to see where I'm going through in the back? your yarn, bring it through, transfer it over. Any questions? Pretty straightforward, I think. The next one I'm going to show you is knit two together. And knit two together is a decrease. So we're going to take 2 stitches and turn those 2 stitches into 1 stitch. So we're doing a decrease. Right. So instead of knitting through the first stitch, like normally you would enter this stitch right here, you're going to skip the first one. You're going to move to the second one. You're going to enter that second one like you would a normal knit stitch. You're going to go through here, but then you're also going to go through the first one. So your needle's going through 2 stitches at once. Wrap your yarn like normal, and then bring that loop through both stitches, transfer them over, and then you have 1 stitch. So you're taking 2 stitches and turning them into 1 stitch. Sometimes it's easier if you move them towards the tip of your needle, but you don't want to risk letting them slip off. So keep your finger right there on the tip. Enter both stitches at the same time, and then you can use your fingers to control the stitches so they don't slip. Wrap your yarn, bring it through both, transfer it over. And that is knit 2 together. That is decreasing by 1. So you're taking 2 stitches and turning them into 1 stitch. Any questions about knit 2 together? How are we doing, Claire?
Looks like we're doing pretty good.
Okay. So the next one I'm going to demonstrate is yarn over. And this is a really easy stitch. What a yarn over will do for you, it adds a new stitch, so it's an increase, but it also creates a hole in your work. So for these eyelet, move this out of the way, these eyelet patterns are where we do the yarn overs. And that's what creates these holes. They're decorative holes. And this is lace. So this is your very first, maybe you've never done lace before, and we kind of tricked you into doing lace because we didn't really tell you this was a lace class, but this is lace. We're arranging these decorative holes to make a pattern. And this is a very simple pattern. They're just in straight lines with knitted rows in between. So it's really easy to do lace. So when you think about doing lace, you probably panic and think it's going to be something really, really hard. But this is a very simple, very basic lace. And then if these are arranged in the shape of a flower, then now it's more complicated. But there's lots of different ways to do it. But the yarn over is what creates these decorative holes. So that eyelet pattern. And it's very easy to do. You've probably done it on accident, not realizing, and then you come back later and you find a hole in your work and you have an extra stitch and you're like, I don't know how I did that. Well, we're going to do it on purpose this time. This is the way I do them. I've seen people make this really complicated. So if you're going to do a stitch, I'm going to knit a stitch just like normal. This is a normal knit stitch. So knit 1 and then yarn over. All I do, you just take the yarn and you wrap it around the needle like that. So you don't enter any stitches, you don't do anything. You just take the yarn over the needle. And so I've got this loop over my needle, and then you do whatever the next stitch is. It could be a knit, it could be a purl. Frequently it's knit 2 together because you've added a stitch, and sometimes they'll have you knit 2 together, and that way it maintains your stitch count. So I did a yarn over, I did knit 2 together. Now let's look at my work and see what happened. So you see there's a hole, because when we do the yarn over, we're putting the loop over the needle, but the bottom of that loop is not connected to anything because we're not going through the stitch. So it creates a hole. And I've got that hole right there. And if you don't want a hole, then that's a big problem. But sometimes you can use these for a buttonhole or for lace, something like that. So that is how you do a yarn over. Super easy. You just take your yarn over your needle. You just wrap the needle just like you would for, you want to go in the same direction, but you're not entering a stitch first. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? And then you just do whatever the next stitch is, whatever the pattern is instructing you to do. Yarn over, knit one, yarn over, knit one. And then you look back and see what you
sorry, Darren.
Okay, what?
Catherine's got a good question. What difference does the direction of the yarn over make?
You will twist your stitch if you wrap it in the wrong direction. So if you wrap it this direction, it does create a twisted stitch. For the yarn over, it might not make as big of a deal, but when you come back and knit that, if it's twisted, it might close that yarn over up a little bit and you might not get such a nice shaped hole. What do you think, Claire? Does it make a big difference on a yarn over?
It does, yeah, because just like you said, if you wrap it the other way and then knit it or purl it normally on the next row, you'll end up closing up that hole. And so if you meant to have a nice decorative eyelet, it won't be there.
Okay, it closes the hole completely then? I wasn't sure about that.
I mean, if you poke at the fabric, you can tell it's there, but it's not very visible.
Yeah. A good rule of thumb, though, when you're knitting or purling, you always want to wrap the yarn in the correct direction. You don't want to get in the habit of wrapping it in the wrong direction for any reason. There is a certain bind off, we're not going to cover that today, where you do a backwards yarn over, but there's always an exception to every rule. The only thing that's always true is nothing is always true, right? So but for best practice, you always want to make sure you're wrapping the yarn the correct way so you don't confuse yourself or form any bad habits. So yarn over, knit one. Any other questions about yarn over? And now I've just added a whole bunch of holes and a whole bunch of stitches to my work. How's that? I'm going to unknit a couple so I don't run out of the edge of my swatch, because you don't want to watch me purl back. But while I'm doing this, do we have any questions? See that yarn over is just there. I'm just going to let it drop off my needle.
Could you demonstrate doing that with the yarn in your right hand just a few times?
Yep. So knit one, yarn over. So you just wrap the needle. However you hold your yarn, however you wrap your needle. One, yarn over. One, yarn over. So it's pretty basic. It's really kind of straightforward. Does it make sense? Any questions about anything we've covered so far?
I'm not sure if we want to get into this because I don't think it's covered in this particular pattern. But if you are purling, like working a purl row and making a yarn over, how does that work?
Let's just turn it and go back. So you purl, and then yarn over, purl, yarn over. It's a little trickier because the yarn kind of wants to come off the needle. You kind of hold it with your thumb. And then you can see here are my yarn overs. It's not attached to anything below, but I'm getting that extra loop. So it's pretty straightforward as well. I don't do a lot of purls. Do you do yarn overs very often on the purl side? If it's a more complicated lace pattern, you might, I guess. Usually you do these things on the front, but not always.
And I think if you are holding the yarn in your right hand and purling, it feels like a little bit of a bigger motion because you have to go over the needle and then back around.
Let me try that. So purl one, whoops, sorry. Purl one, yarn over. Oops, yeah, it does seem like a little extra wrapping. Yeah, but that doesn't come up in this pattern. So, but it's nice sometimes to practice something to demonstrate. And then when you come back, now I've got a bunch of yarn overs here that I did. You want to just knit them like normal. Just pretend that nothing has happened. You just knit them the way you would knit any other stitch. They will feel a little bit looser. It might feel a little strange because maybe you've never done this before, but then you just knit them just like normal. And that's what creates that nice big hole. So just knit them just like normal. And then you get these nice decorative holes. All right. Any other questions? Anyway. Anything else? That's pretty much the stitches that you're going to need.
Good question from Carmen. If you miss doing a yarn over, is there a way do you have to rip all the way back to fix it, or can you fudge it?
I would rip back and fix it. You can kind of, like if you come back across it, you can pick up a loop, like if you were going to do a make one, but you're not really going to have as much slack there. So it's not going to give you a nice big open hole. Like it might not match the other ones. You could, and then if you block it, you could kind of stretch it out a bit. So it's possible to kind of fudge it, but I wouldn't probably recommend it unless if you've gone like 4 or 5 rows, 6 rows, and it's a long way back, maybe you could leave it, but you want to try not to do that. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, that would have been my suggestion. If it's only a little bit down, you can fudge it by picking up the bar between the stitches, but it will be tighter and not as open as your actual yarn overs.
And if you kind of force it open, you're gonna pull tension from the stitches around it, and the other stitches around it might look tight. So it may or may not look nice when you're done. So it just kind of depends. Okay. Anything else?
I think we are okay.
Okay, so we're okay. The next thing I want to show you, it's really, really simple, but if you've never done it before, of course, things are complicated the first time. You're going to have to place a stitch marker. And so I've got these stitch markers here, these rings. And when you place a stitch marker, you just put it on your right-hand needle like that. And now I've placed my marker. If you put it on your left-hand needle, then when you go to knit this stitch, you're going to have to move that out of the way and slip it right over. So go ahead and just put that on your right-hand needle. Now my marker is placed, and then you will do whatever stitch is next. Knit, purl, knit 2 together, whatever it's telling you. And then it might say place another marker. So you just put that marker in place. Just drop it right on there. Nothing is so easy. Like, don't make it hard. And then knit whatever pattern it's telling you to do. Place marker. I'm going to knit 2 together just to get to the end of the row a little faster, as we want to talk about these bind offs. All right, end of the row. I want to show you how to slip a marker because, again, it's so easy to do, but if you've never done it before, then it's not so easy. So I'm just gonna knit like normal across until I get to my marker. Knitting like normal. Okay, I've come to a marker, and you're gonna do whatever it said. Usually it will direct you like one stitch before the marker, make one, or one stitch before the marker, knit two together. It'll give you some type of a direction. That's why the marker is there. It'll tell you. It might say make one before the marker, slip marker, make one after marker. Sometimes that's what it's telling you. But the stitch marker is there. It's not just decorative. It's there to remind you that's where you're going to be doing something. And for slipping the marker, well, you don't really want to drop it off. Let me do it without dropping it. So you just put it in your needle and slip it over. So you just slip it over. Now the danger is, if you're not paying attention, what can happen is you can knit the stitch marker into your stitch. So I've knitted that, and now it's part of my knitting. Now I've got a decorative like bead on my shawl, and maybe that's the life you're living. I don't know what your life is like, but if you do that, you might have a problem. But these stitch markers are not sealed, so I can bend it and take it out and then rebend it. But if you have one that's soldered together, then you either have to cut it with pliers or rip it out and go back and release it. So, but that's really how you slip a marker. You just slip the marker and then do whatever it says next, slip the marker, and just usually on the back of the work, you'll just purl across and slip the markers as you come to them. Slip the marker. But I'm doing garter stitch here. I'm just knitting back and forth. Any questions about placing a marker or slipping a marker? Okay, we did knit front and back, KF and B, knit two together, yarn over, placing marker, and slipping marker. How do we feel about all that? You feel good?
You could just physically take the marker off and put it on the other needle too, if you're not coordinated enough to slip it with the needle tip, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so like I've got this marker here. You can take it off and then just put it right. It doesn't matter. You just want to make sure it's staying between these two stitches. You don't want to like somehow, misplace it into a different place. So you can just take it off, you can slip it, whatever you want to do, however you need to do to get it over here. But the most important thing is you don't want to get it in a different position. It has to stay between these two stitches. And then the next stitch, you'll just do whatever was being called for. It's pretty simple. Don't make it complicated. Just try to keep it. We're not trying to trick you. There's no, sometimes when I was first learning to knit, I always thought there was, it was harder than it should be, or there was some kind of a trick, but we're not trying to trick you. Any other questions?
And what is the stitch marker for?
So the stitch marker marks something. When you're making your project, it will direct you to knit. It might say knit one stitch before the marker, make one, slip marker, make one, knit 10. It might say knit to the stitch marker, slip the marker, knit two together. It might say knit to the stitch marker, yarn over, slip the marker, knit one, yarn over. So the stitch marker is marking a position in your work where things are going to be happening. And you want to make sure that you're doing them all in the exact right place, because if you're not, then you won't have a nice straight line. So the increases or decreases, or maybe it's a diagonal row of like yarn overs, which are going to create a hole. You want them to be in a nice straight line. It gives it a very clean look. So that makes sure that you're doing the increase or decrease or whatever it's having you do always in the right place, so they line up. Is anything else, Claire, about that?
I think before we get to all of our different bind off types, if we could just review maybe like the first 5 or 6 rows of the pattern, just so people know what the abbreviations are and how they're going to look like.
Okay, we can start with that. Okay, so here's the pattern. This is a free pattern. You can find it on lionbrand.com, or Claire is going to put it in the handout, or I'm sorry, in the chat. And it just tells you the stuff that you're going to need. It gives you some gauge information. It talks about the stitch. It gives stitch explanations here. So you can review these. You can rewatch this class, or you can watch videos on YouTube on how to do them. But once you've done these stitches a couple of times, they're really straightforward. You won't have a problem. So this, again, this shawl, it's, if you've never made a shawl like this before, it's a little bit interesting because this is the center of the back and this is where you're casting on. So it might seem like a weird situation when you first start, but it's not. And after you make it, you'll see how it's working together. So you're going to cast on 5 stitches. So you just cast on like normal, just a normal cast on of 5 stitches. Rows 1 and 2, you're going to knit. So you just knit all those rows. You're working in garter stitch. And that will help the shawl to lay flat. And it also makes it reversible. So it's nice to have it either way. Row number 3, you're going to knit 1. So K1, and then K, F, and B. So knit 1, knit front and back, knit 1, knit front and back, knit 1. You will have 7 stitches at the end of row 3. So you might want to give it an extra little count and just make sure you have 7 stitches there. Row 4, you just knit. Very easy. Row 5, and now it's telling you that's the right side. You're going to knit 2. YO is yarn over. So knit 2, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, place marker. So when you come to that marker, you're always going to make sure you do your yarn overs right there. You're going to see that marker coming up and you'll know I have to pay attention because something's going to happen. So you're going to place the marker, which is PM, knit 1, place another marker, and then yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 2. And you'll have 11 stitches at the end of that row. So any questions about any of these abbreviations? Oh, I could read that. So if it says knit 2, that just means knit 2 stitches. It does not mean knit 2 together. It just means knit 2 stitches. Knit 2 together. Let's see if I can find it on here. Oh, I have the abbreviation of it right here. So knit 2 together looks like this. K2, the number 2 kind of written like that. TOG, knit 2 together. And then knit, it might say knit 2, it might say knit 10, it could have any number after that. Anything else?
We've had a few questions about using straight needles for this pattern. You could certainly start on straight needles, right?
You can start on straight needles, and you can stay on straight needles until it gets too many stitches and you can't stay on them anymore. You can jam your stitches and put as many stitches on your needles as possible, but eventually it's going to become very unpleasant and you will want to switch to double pointed, like circular needles, so that they have an open on at each end. It'll make it much easier for you to work. But you can certainly try to stay on straight needles as long as you want, for as long as you can. Any other questions?
How would you suggest
So when you get
keeping track of, oops, sorry, Darren. How would you suggest keeping track of rows in the pattern as you're going?
Oh, that's a question that there are many answers to, but sometimes I mark them, like you can take a pen or a pencil, and after you've finished row 1, you can put a check by each one. At the end of the row, I'm like, did I check it or not? I don't remember. I checked the last one, or was that this one? Like I'm horrible about these type of things. The way I keep track of my rows is if I'm not sure where I was, I'll read the row and see what I was supposed to be doing. And then I'll go back and look at my knitting and see what I actually did. and then I'll be able to figure out what row I'm on by doing that. That's how I do it, because that way you always know the right answer. But for people that are a little bit more, like if you pay attention to what you're doing more than I do, you can just put a check mark at the end of each row. There are little row counters that are plastic, and you can click it and it changes the number. Yeah, you can use um, a Post-it note. Somebody was showing a Post-it note in the pictures. I could see them. You can just take, I do that. I actually do that a lot. Sometimes I use that. So you do, so I'm on row 4, and then you do row 5, and then you just move this down. And then if you come back like tomorrow morning, you'll know exactly where you were. There are apps. There's an app for that. I've never used the apps for it, but people do say there's apps that they use to help them keep track. What do you do, Claire? What do you recommend?
If it's not something that's going to have, a bunch of repeat this row 42 more times, then I just cross off the row on the pattern as I go to it. But otherwise, I have a little locking click stitch row counter.
Yeah. How are you sure that you clicked it or didn't click it, or you just know what you're doing? Like, I never know what I'm doing, so.
It makes a pretty big click noise, and so, I'm like,
Okay.
okay, did it. And I like that it locks, so when I put it back in the project bag, it doesn't accidentally get clicked.
Oh yeah, that's good. It would have to lock. That would make it
Yeah.
a crazy situation. So this pattern is pretty straightforward. And then it gets a little bit more complicated as you get down. Not very complicated, but just kind of a little bit. I saw somebody requested row 37, the eyelet row. And if you come to a row like, and there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of stitches, just that's one time when like a Post-it note really comes in handy, because you can put a Post-it note right under that line. You can put another one above that line, so that way you're only looking at that line. Sometimes that helps me focus if I'm not focusing, if I'm getting distracted. And you can do it like this. And then that takes your eye kind of away from everything else, and we're only looking at this. It's really not as complicated as it might look. If you read it before you start, so put down your work and read it, and then just do one stitch at a time very carefully. We're going to knit 2, that's easy. Yarn over, easy. Knit 1, and then there's an asterisk, and whenever there's an asterisk or parentheses or brackets, that usually means we're going to repeat something. It means something there's something you need to pay attention to, but usually it's something that's going to be repeated. So yarn over, knit 2 together, repeat from the asterisk to 1 stitch before the marker. So there's an example of how, that's why the stitch markers are important, because you're going to go 1 stitch before the marker, knit 1, yarn over, slip marker, knit 1, slip the next marker, yarn over, knit 1. So you have 2 stitch markers here that you're going to be dealing with. So that's why it says slip marker twice. There are actually 2 markers. And now here they have 2 asterisks together. And the reason they have 2 is because they're going to tell you to repeat from the asterisks again, and they don't want you to going back to this one. They want you to start here. So that's why there are 2 asterisks. It might look like, oh my God, there's 2 asterisks. What does that mean? It just doesn't mean anything. It just means this is a separate section. So knit 2 together, yarn over, repeat from the double asterisk to the last 3 stitches, knit 1, yarn over, knit 2 together. I'm sorry, knit 1, yarn over, knit 2. So you want to make sure you're not reading it incorrectly like I just did. And at the end, you should have 101 stitches. And if you're very technical and diligent, you will count your stitches and make sure. I probably don't. I would just lay my shawl out and look at it and see if the eyelets look spaced out nicely. And if everything looks nice, I would probably call it a day. You really want to double check. You'll see as you're working on it, there's a point that starts forming. So you're going to see it working into a point where you really want to make sure you're not making any mistakes you want this to always stay nice. You're going to have like a spine right up the center and then a yarn over on each side of it. So you don't want that to be off. Like if you skip your yarn over here, you're really going to notice it. And then with these eyelets, again, like if you skip one, it's going to look funny. So you don't want to do that. But if you lay it out and look at it and everything looks right, that's how would you would count them, wouldn't you, Claire?
I mean, it's fairly easy along the spine to count the yarn overs to make sure that you're on track, but
every time Claire makes something, it's always perfect and beautiful. So I think she counts them. All right, any other questions about the pattern? And it's just really straightforward like that. And then you just continue on with the same stitches and then until it's time to bind off.
oh, we did have a
Anything
question.
else?
Hang on. Between rows 5 and 6, we're not doing a plain row, I think is the question.
No, it's not having you do it. It's having you. It's not. It doesn't say just to knit. So you will have this activity in between them.
And I think that's just because it's still the very beginning of the shawl. So you're getting where all the yarn overs are positioned so it can start to open up and make that triangle shape.
And then when you come down here to like row 8 through 31, you repeat rows 6 and 7 12 times. So you will be using that a lot, like 6 and 7, but you won't be using 5 and 6 together again. So it creates different looks and a different shape by doing it that way. Yeah, so just read it carefully and just make sure you're following the, reading each stitch at a time, and don't get overwhelmed if it looks like a lot of stitches.
Oh, I just wanted to say one thing about that rows 8 through 31. When you're repeating, you'll alternate between those two rows. I had a question about that the other day.
Oh yeah, like you don't do 6 12 times and then 7 12 times. You do 6 7 6 7 6 7. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to show you a little bit about binding off. This one I bound off just the normal way where you like knit 2 stitches and then you pass one over, kind of like leapfrogs over. This is really the bind off I almost always use. And I wanted to see how much stretch is actually in it. And if I stretch this, without stretching it, too hard, I can go like 6, 7.5 to 8 inches. So it's kind of stretchy. Now, this bind off is usually very stiff, but I've trained myself to do this bind off very loose because I've made that mistake enough times that I'm really good at just doing it loose, giving myself plenty of ease. And so I can get quite a bit of stretch out of this bind off, but a lot of times you won't. And when I first started knitting, I didn't. And I have a couple of projects I should probably redo the bind off because like the cast on is fine, but the bind off is super tight and it makes it like a couple of cows like that, and it just makes it not nice. So this is the regular one. And then this one this is the Icelandic bind off. And you can see this creates a different, if you do different colors, it could create a decorative edge. And if you stretch this one, so this one goes up almost to 10. Like if I really stretch it hard, it goes to 10, but like 9, 9.5. And that one is quite stretchy. So I'll demonstrate how to do that one really quick. So the Icelandic Bind Off. And you can rewatch this class because we're not going to have a lot of time to redo them. But they're also all available. I just watched videos on YouTube to find out some good ideas for different ones. So there's lots of information out there. So the Icelandic one, you start off with just a knit stitch. A normal knit, and mine's loose because I didn't, I'm starting with new yarn so that you can see what I'm doing. and then you slip that stitch back on your needle. So I knitted one stitch and I slipped it back, and then you're going to enter that stitch as if to purl, and then you enter the next stitch as if to knit, and then you wrap your yarn, and then you're bringing it just through this second stitch, transfer it over. Let me tighten that up because I started a new yarn. And then you put that one back on. Let me see if I can get this so you can see it really clear what I'm doing. You enter the stitch as if to purl, and then you enter this next stitch as if to knit, and you're bringing it up through. And then you're going to wrap your yarn. And then you're just bringing it through your new stitch. You're not bringing it through both. Transfer it over. And then this stitch kind of gets laid down on its side, and that's what creates the stretch. And then you slip that back over, enter it as if to purl, enter the next one as if to knit, and you can kind of see it's just pulling it through that stitch. Are you able to see what I'm doing? So enter it as if to purl, enter the next one as if to knit. And you can see how this red stitch, I'm kind of pulling this gray stitch through the red one. So you enter it this way, enter that one as if to knit, kind of pull it through, and then knit it. Transfer them off. I stretched that one out a bit so you could see what I was doing. So that's why it's a little bit looser. So enter as if to purl, enter the gray one, the next stitch as if to knit, kind of pulling it through. And of course you would be doing this with the same color, like you probably wouldn't be binding off in a different color, but I'm doing this in an effort to make it more clear what I'm doing. Any questions? When you do it, it actually forms a nice rhythm. But as you saw, it does give you a really nice stretch. Like it really gives, and like for the top of a sock, you want to have a nice stretch. At the edge of a hat, you don't want it to be, if you're doing a hat top down, you don't want it to have a nice, be too stiff. You want it to have that nice stretch. And this one, it's just called the Stretchy Bind Off, but you kind of do it in the same way you do an SSK. So I wrote SSK Stretchy Bind Off down on here. So let's see how much stretch we get on this one. See, this one almost goes to 11. So if I really stretch it further, I could go further, but a nice 10.5 without, stretching it too much, 10, 10.5, or up to 11. If you wanted to get aggressive about it, you could probably take it up to 12, but then you might be, it might not bounce back as well. So this is a really nice stretchy one too. And then you can just kind of decide which one you like doing more. Let me start another swatch so you can see what I'm doing. I'll cut my red yarn off. So I made up a bunch of swatches so we could demonstrate. So the SSK one, it starts with knit 2. And then you take your left-hand needle and you enter those stitches like you were going to do an SSK. So I don't know if anyone knows how to do an SSK. It stands for slip, slip, knit, and it's a decrease. So if you know how to do that, then you've done this motion before. But if you don't know how to do that, you just take your left-hand needle and you enter those 2 stitches through the front. And then you wrap your right-hand needle and bring it through. And then you knit another one, just like normal. And then you knit another one. Okay, any questions about that? Probably are. Another way to do it is you can slide them both back over and then enter them through the back loop, and it ends up being pretty much the same thing. So it can be, whatever you kind of like better. But you see, once we get to here, by entering through the back loop, pretty much looks the same. Okay. And as you saw, that one gives a lot of stretch. It gives a lot of stretch, and it's a nice option. Okay. The next one, we did Icelandic, SSK. The next one is the knit two together bind off. And let's see how much. See, that one also goes up to about an 11. So that gives a lot of stretch. If I really get aggressive, I can take it up to the 12. But again, you don't want to see how it kind of stretches your fabric out. It'll go back to shape, but if you do that a lot, then eventually it will lose its shape. So the knit two together bind off. Get my swatch. I have a swatch. Is you knit 2 stitches, slide them both back on, and then knit 2 together. Knit 1 stitch, slide them both back on, knit 2 together. Knit another stitch, slide them, I split my yarn here, slide them both back on, and then knit 2 together. And I've also saw it where, let me see, knit another one, both back on, knit 2 together. And there's also another version where you just have 1 stitch, slide it back on, and then knit these 2 together. I saw both. This one is not as stretchy. That the other way of doing it gives you a little extra yarn and a little extra stretch. So the other way is knit 2 new stitches, slip them both over, and then knit 2 together. Oops. Any questions about this one? They're all really easy once you kind of get in the rhythm of it. Okay. And then another one I wanted to show you, and you just pick your favorite. Like, you don't have to do all of them, of course. Like, you would just kind of pick one you like the best. Okay. So this one is knit 2 together through the back loop. And so this one, let's see how much stretch we get out of this one. This one goes up to 9. So this one is not quite as stretchy, but it still gives you a nice amount of stretch. So you start by knitting 2 stitches through the back loop. And again, I'm attaching new yarn right at the beginning here, so it looks a little loose. I'm knitting with my tail because I'm trying to hurry. Slide them back on, and then knit 2 together again through the back loop. So knit it through the back loop, slide them back on, and then knit through the back loop. So there's, normally we wouldn't knit through the back loop, but again, like there's always a situation where it's okay. And then I saw another version of this one too, where you slip that one back on and then knit through the back loop. Instead of working with 2 new stitches, you're just working with 1. So here's my new stitch. I slip it back on. And this one's not quite as stretchy. And then you knit through both. Or the stretchier version is knit 2 new stitches, slide them both over, knit through the back loop, knit a new stitch. So I have 2 new stitches, slide them both over, knit through the back loop. Are you able to see what's happening? Does it make sense? So any one of these is fine. So you can kind of pick. I really only ever do the basic one. Sometimes I've done Jenny's surprisingly stretchy one, which I didn't demonstrate because I find that one flares out a bit and gives you kind of a flared edge, which it's not my favorite, but it is very stretchy. But I usually just do the normal one where here's the normal one, and then you pass this one over. This is the one I almost always do, and I've got in the habit of doing it really loose. I'm going to pull my stitches really loose, and so I don't end up with that really tight edge. I just kind of keep everything. I really don't like doing this one though. I don't like the motion of it, so I might try to get in the habit of trying some of the other ones because they're actually kind of fun. So just pick whichever one you want, but if you do this normal one, just make sure you're not, you can use a bigger needle to loosen it up, but you can see how I do it. I just see I'm pulling that, so it's pulling a lot of slack in it. And then I kind of pull this one. I'm just keeping a lot of slack in them. And you feel like it's not going to look nice, it's going to look too loose, but it never seems to. Okay. So I guess that's pretty much the class. Oh, I didn't go over this week. I finished 2 minutes early. Never happened before.
Oh, I was going to wait a minute, Darren.
Do you have any questions?
Can you rapid fire go through the names of those bind offs again? And I'll type them in the chat.
Yes, I have knit 2 together through the back loop, bind off, knit 2 together, bind off, the Icelandic bind off, I looked at this online. I was looking up new ones to find one I thought would be fun, and this one was just called the Stretchy Bind Off, but it's the one that's like an SSK, so I called it the SSK Stretchy Bind Off, but it was just the Stretchy Bind Off. And is that all? Was there another one?
I think that was it.
Icelandic.
Because you showed a couple different ways for the knit 2 together bind off.
Yeah, I showed, there's so many, when I was researching for the class, everyone calls them different things and does them different ways. So it's weird. It's hard to, I don't know if there's an official name of any of these actually. So, okay, anything else?
And really quickly, we had a request to see how to knit the yarn over when you come back to it on the next row.
Okay. Back to my other swatch.
as well as seeing the finished shawl one
Always
more
keep
time.
notes so I don't say things backwards. I always have to have my notes when I'm teaching. I'll use this swatch. Hold on, let me find a swatch that's not such a mess. Okay, so what was the question again? How to knit a yarn over?
How to knit into the yarn over when you
Back
come
and
back
forth?
to it on the next row.
Just make a couple of stitches. So the main thing is when you're doing that, it's going to seem a little weird, but you just want to pretend like nothing's happening. So let me pull yarn here, and then I'll pretend like nothing, like nothing's happening. That's it. Like just pretend it's like normal, and everything will be fine. So let me get to the end, and then we'll knit those yarn overs. Don't let it be something hard. So there's a yarn over. So see that and you'll panic, looks different. You don't have to, just enter the stitch as normal. Yarn, and then bring your yarn through, and then you've got that stitch. That's a normal stitch. This is a yarn over, but guess what? We're just going to pretend it's a normal stitch. We're not going to panic. We don't have to worry. That's a normal stitch. This is a yarn over. Now, if you were knitting like a hat or something that was not supposed to have a yarn over, and you got here, of course you're going to panic and see that. If you do a yarn over in the wrong place and you don't want that yarn over, if you do that and skip to the next stitch, then you can get rid of that yarn over, and that extra slack will work back in. But so if you let that slip off by mistake, your yarn over will go away. But you just knit it just like normal. Pretend like you're just having a normal day. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
The yarn
And
over,
then,
we're not going to worry about it.
while you've got the overhead view, could you lay out the shawl as it would look while you were knitting it, just so people can get an idea how that's going to look?
So you would have your circular needles. These aren't the right size, but you would be, stretch it out here. You'll be knitting along this edge here. Is that the question?
Pull back to like the start of the shawl, maybe.
So when you start it, you're going to cast on your 5 stitches here, and you'll be knitting back and forth. And every time you do a yarn over here, that adds a stitch, so that makes it bigger. And every time you do a yarn over along the edge, or some, I think it was did we have knit front and back or something? I forget now. But every time you have a yarn over or a knit front and back, that creates extra stitches. And that's what forces it into this triangular shape. So you can, I don't know if you can see, but the rows of the garter stitch aren't running straight across. They're running on a diagonal shape like this. It's not showing up well on the camera, I don't think. So like here, like that's the row of the garter stitch. And they're not running straight across, they're running diagonal. And then the one on this side is going this direction. So it's going to form a triangular shape. You're actually working along, you're actually working along this, like your stitches would be here, and you'd be progressing this way. So that way you can see it here for the eyelets. They're going in a diagonal shape this direction. And then here you get to the point, kind of makes a little more sense. You can see here's the center of the triangle, and then it's coming from each direction like that. Does that help?
Yeah, is your camera zoomed in? I can't tell if you're gesturing above the camera line. Whoop.
Is that what, do you want to see it like that?
Yeah, there we go.
See how messy my desk is this way. Once, I promise you that once you start it, just cast on and follow the directions, give it a good 20 minutes and it'll be just like magic. You won't understand how it's happening at first, but as you watch how it forms the shape, it'll make perfect sense when you start it, especially if you're the type of person that likes math and geometry, which I am not that type of person. But it's actually a very logical process, which a lot of people will really enjoy. Okay. Any other questions? You can wear it like this. You can be mysterious. I usually just wear them like this. I think they're a little bit more modern, a little more contemporary, and you wear it like with a nice jacket. Okay. Any other questions? Anything else? So if you do have questions, you can find me on Instagram or TikTok, and my name on those two platforms is Mr. Woolly Bear. Maybe Claire will put it in the chat. It's spelled out M-I-S-T-E-R, Woolly Bear. And if you send me a direct message, I can usually get back pretty quick. And if you make the shawl or are working on it and you post on social media, I'd love to see, if you tag me in a picture, I'd love to see your progress. It's really exciting to see what the students are making and working on. So, all right. Any other questions? All right, enjoy, just keep practicing. Thanks for coming to class.